All right, we should have folks starting to join us. I know it's going to take just a little bit, but I've just allowed everybody to hop on in. So see that participant list just skyrocketing. All right, well, I do want to extend a warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for another in our 2021 homeowner series. We are looking at delivering timely topics and information to y'all in the best way we know how, which is using a little bit of a Zoom meeting in order to connect you with either our office or some of the specialists in our network. And speaking of that, today we've got an absolutely great one. I think one of the best speakers we certainly have here when it comes to delivering this information to y'all. Got a ton of experience. How long have you been working with Extension, Bob?
Probably longer than you'd believe, 32 years.
Okay, well, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot or date you, but, I was honestly curious because I knew you had plenty of experience, and so yeah,
Yes, sir.
that really is incredible. But yeah, suffice to say, I think that paints a pretty accurate picture of just how much experience you have and why you're able to give such great information to folks. So yeah, do you want to give any sort of background on yourself before we get started?
No, I'll just say, yeah, I've loved working with the university. I'm here on the Griffin campus. I'm actually the fruit and vegetable specialist. I work a lot with homeowner type programs, but also with small grower operations, and actually have a farm of my own where we actually do everything we teach. I do myself. I grow a little bit of commercial vegetables, fruit, and things like that. We also raise cattle, and so I have a lot of fun being able to come to work and talk about it, but I also go home and do it. So that's
Wonderful.
kind of the short of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, just before we get started, I want to cover a couple little housekeeping things. So as far as questions, because I know y'all will probably have some questions, for the purposes of keeping distractions to a minimum for our speaker today, I'm going to try and keep everybody on mute. So if you do have a question, just put that in chat. If we've got some time at the end, then maybe, you can unmute if you want to ask that directly. If you want to start your video up and you want to have a more kind of one-on-one, we may be able to do it that way. The other thing that I want to mention to folks, I'm putting this in the chat to everybody right now, and this is a link to an evaluation survey. This is both to help us gather demographic data to make sure that we are meeting the needs of the community, but also to help inform future programming. And there's also a space in there too. If you like what you see today and you're interested in seeing more, you can sign up. And we'll send you notifications of future programming directly. So you don't necessarily have to hunt it down on our Facebook or on the extension calendar or however you heard about it today. Regardless, that's about all I've got. So I'll go ahead and shut up, but I'll pass it over to you, Bob, and take it away.
Thank you, James. Well, good morning, folks. I'd certainly much rather either be standing in front of you or better yet, maybe over in an orchard somewhere, because it's a lot easier when we kind of demonstrate it and show some of the techniques. But hopefully you'll get something out of today's webinar. We're going to talk about home orchard management, kind of focusing on the pruning, but we'll talk about a few of the details that you might want to know, whether you've had some fruit trees or bushes before, or you're thinking about doing it. Or maybe you're a master gardener and you're going to be answering questions about it. Hopefully some of this information will be helpful to you. Kind of on this first slide here, it almost looks like me up there, but it's not. But that's really getting into the work right there. And I'm certainly not, saying that we need to climb up these trees and do the pruning up there. That could be kind of dangerous, particularly if it was something like a pear tree or an apple tree that's got very thorny stems, but kind of interesting the way that is. Moving right along. Why should you know how to prune anything that has to do with fruit, some type of edible landscape? And, you might be interested in it. You might always have wanted to grow your own apples, maybe your own peaches, which is always a challenge, or plums, or something simpler like blueberries or blackberries. Well, all of the fruit basically needs proper pruning to produce well. You could get by not pruning something for a couple of years, and you may get some fruit off of it. Why should we even know how to prune fruit trees? And the biggest reason I was mentioning was because it's what actually helps them to produce. You can leave a fruit tree or bush alone for a year or two, and it might kick out a little bit of fruit, but that fruit will probably be undersized, overcrowded, and over time, it will not produce well. So by actually doing our pruning and doing it correctly, we're going to increase not only the quantity of fruit, but the quality of it. what can we grow as homeowners in Georgia, middle Georgia, wherever? I was saying peaches. Peaches are a very difficult crop. They are probably the most sprayed crop in Georgia. In fact, there's no real such thing as organic peaches in the state. They have to be sprayed continuously with fungicides, insecticides, and all different kinds of things to keep them from disease and insect attack. Apples can also be a little bit finicky in this part of the state. They grow a little better in more North Georgia and certainly north of the state of Georgia. But you pick the right varieties, you take care of them, you can certainly produce your own apples, and it's kind of a neat thing to do. Pears are a little bit more forgiving. In fact, you only have to drive down the road in the springtime, and everyone always asks me, well, what is that white thing I always see blooming early in the spring in the woods? Well, those are wild pears. Those are actually escaped Bradford pears, the ornamental pear that everyone likes to plant, which is kind of a nuisance tree. It does actually put out a little baby pear, and they're eaten by animals and birds. They get deposited, and all of a sudden we have all these little wild Bradfords in the woods. Okay. Well, that being said, you can see pears do pretty well. Well, the cultivated ones do fairly well in our state as well. Plums, they're in the same kind of family group as peaches, the stone fruits. But plums are a little bit more forgiving, and you can actually do a really good job of, producing plums in the state. Figs are kind of an old-time favorite. I've got a fig tree. They're not that difficult to grow. They can get quite large, though, and some people don't account for that. They put it right up next to the house, and a fig tree can get 20 feet tall and 20 feet wide if you let it. So it's something you really have to leave some space for. But figs will make it in our state. The biggest trick on them is you just got to kind of protect them in the wintertime when they're young. They're not very cold hardy. Okay, speaking of cold hardy, pomegranates. It's kind of a newer fruit that folks are growing. Some people have ornamental pomegranates. There are folks on rare occasion that have got the production type pomegranates that produce fruit. But it's more rare than common because pomegranates are very susceptible to late frost. They don't like the cold. They would much prefer to be sitting down in Florida. And then there's citrus, and we won't dwell a long time on that. Let's just bear to say that citrus is difficult to grow. Some of the satsumas and other orange type varieties can grow in South Georgia, and with care and possible winter protection, they can make it up here. Certainly, some of these things can be produced in greenhouses. In fact, we grow pineapples here at the Griffin campus in one of the greenhouses. So if you can control the climate, anything is possible. All right, where should you buy the fruit trees? Well, that comes into some of the knowledge of what a fruit tree is made out of. If we're talking a tree such as a pear, an apple, a peach tree, you're really buying two trees, and you might know that. You're buying a grafted tree. Okay, the rootstock or the base of it is different than the top part, which is called the scion. The scion is the desirable. It's the type of apple you want, the type of peach you want, pear, whatever, plum. Okay, and so they're grafted together to give the strength of that rootstock and all the resistances that it has to the upper portion, which is the desirable eating portion. Okay, and it really matters what kind of rootstock you get. There are different types out there. We're going to look at that. But I would first off say, if I had a choice, I would prefer to buy from a reputable orchard growing company. And there's not that many in the state. There is one not too far from here called Ison, I-S-O-N, Ison's Nursery, that do a really good job on the fruit production. There's also Bottom's Nursery, again, not too far from Griffin. And there's probably a few others. Tai Nursery, I think, is another one. Or you can go online. You can buy them at the box stores and the Home Depots and places like that, but sometimes you don't quite get a very good selection of either varieties and or rootstocks. I've mentioned rootstock a couple of times. What is that? Well, it's basically the rootstock is the base of the plant. It's the root system, and it controls a lot. It controls how resistant to disease and other type things like nematodes the plant is, but it also controls how big it will get. So if you had a standard or what we call a vigorous rootstock on a plant, that might be something more for a commercial orchard, something where you want maximum size and production. On a smaller size family backyard, or maybe you've got really small space, you're going to probably want something more like a semi-dwarf or even a dwarf rootstock, and that's going to keep that plant in a very manageable size where you can harvest it without having to worry about ladders and cherry pickers, okay? And you can also maintain it, pruning and those type things. So think in terms of maybe semi-dwarf or dwarf if you've really got to have a small plant. And that's where going to a special fruit nursery to pick up your plants, you'll be able to select from different rootstocks in most cases. Fig trees, you don't have to worry about. Figs are not grafted, so you basically get what you get. Figs are grown from cuttings, okay, and they actually develop very easily from cuttings from just a branch stem, and there's not going to be any rootstock that's going to determine, whether or not it's going to be small, large, or medium. By figs, we just basically select from variety. Okay, real important pollination requirements, and we'll keep this real simple. Self-fruitful and self-unfruitful. In a simplistic term, basically self-fruitful means it has everything it needs to pollinate itself on the tree itself. So when you look at peaches or nectarines or even figs, they have a complete flower that allows an insect, as it's buzzing through and so forth, everything that needs to be done is on that one tree. What does that mean? Well, it just means at the end of the day, you only need one of those trees to produce fruit. Everything you need for pollination and development of the fruit is on that one tree. On the other side, the self-unfruitful, apples, pears, and some of the plums that are out there, and also things like blueberries and some of the blackberries are self-unfruitful, meaning they're going to need some co-pollinators nearby. And we don't mean, two of the same apple or two of the same pear. We mean two different varieties. And then we can get into what we call pollination codes. Basically, what you're looking for are varieties of the same type of fruit, but different variety that bloom at the same time. In our publications, we've got our UGA extension publications. We talk about which ones make good pollinators. Also, if you go to a fruit orchard, like I talked about, to buy your fruit type orchard nursery, they're going to be able to match you up with, hey, here's two apples that will pollinate each other. Here's two pears and so forth. But that's real important. If you plant one apple or one pear and it's a self-unfruitful, meaning it doesn't have everything it needs, you're going to get a really nice tree. You might even occasionally get some really tiny little fruit developing, but it's never going to produce a good solid fruit because it doesn't have a pollinator nearby. So in most cases, you're going to have at least two varieties of that same fruit. All right, just real quick, planting fruit trees. Now's a great time to start putting some of your fruit tree plants in the ground. Between now and really a smaller window, between now and about mid-March is when you want to get them in the ground. You could have done it this fall. So really from fall till the next couple of weeks would be an adequate time to put fruit trees in the ground. Dig a large hole. I mean, you want to make it bigger than the planting hole. I'm sorry, bigger than the root ball. And then make sure you're planting it very level. On a grafted tree, you'll see what's called the graft union. If you look above this shovel, you can kind of see where it sort of takes a little bit of a dog leg. That's the union right there where it was grafted. You want to make sure that graft union is above the ground, a couple of inches, okay? You don't want to bury that graft union, otherwise the rootstock will begin to grow out of that. And that happens sometimes anyway, but make sure that graft is above the ground. Dig a large planting hole. As many of the county agents will tell you, about twice the size of the root ball. Sometimes you've got a bare root plant and it's not a very big root system. Well, dig it bigger anyway. Dig at least a hole a foot or 2 feet wide where that soil will be easy for it to penetrate. And I don't recommend adding in any organic matter. If you want to amend the entire bed and till that in a large area and say plant several blueberries, blackberries, or something like that, that's fine to do. But don't dig a large planting hole, say for an apple, pear, plum, dump in a bunch of potting soil or some other type of amendment, and then stick your tree in the hole. That's too much of a change, and the porosity or the way water penetrates that's going to be really crazy. And what will happen is it'll probably wind up getting what we call wet feet. A lot of water will come into that hole and it won't drain out very well. Okay, so avoid putting organic matter into the planting hole. If you're going to use it, that's fine, but till it into the entire area. Okay, if you really want the best production, then being able to water your plants, particularly right after planting, to kind of acclimate them and get them going is going to be important. Drip irrigation systems are great for fruit top trees. You don't have to water the entire root system. If you can just get, say, a drip system where a quarter of it or less is getting watered, it's going to absorb that moisture. It's going to translocate it or move it into all parts of the tree. How often do you need to water? Well, it depends on the soil, depends on how much rainfall we have. But in most cases, usually one time a week, where you can penetrate that depth to about 5 or 6 inches with the irrigation is what you'd be looking for. Fertility is a whole nother subject, and we all probably have heard about soil testing. The county extension offices offer soil testing where you can bring them a sample of your soil, and they'll give you a whole recipe for whether or not you need to add lime or maybe the opposite, add sulfur. It'll also give you a recipe for fertility, and that's the best way to go. In general, let me say this: most fruit plants and fruit trees are going to do best in a slightly acidic soil, somewhere between 6.2 and 6.8. The exception of this is going to be blueberries. Blueberries like it very acid, and their pH range is going to be more comfortable if it's in 4.5 up to about 5.5. So that's way lower than the rest of them. And that's why I don't normally recommend planting blueberries close to your other trees. You want them to sort of be on their own so you can manage that soil pH separately. And the pH is going to be everything when it comes to growing blueberries, and other trees for that matter. If the pH is not adjusted properly, all the fertility in the world won't help. So in general, after you plant your fruit trees this time of the year, or you've done it maybe a little bit earlier, you don't have to fertilize right now. But as soon as the foliage starts to begin to flush out in the spring, maybe in a couple of weeks from now, that would be a good time to hit with the initial fertility. And then maybe about 6 or 7 weeks later, hit it again with some fertility. Again, we won't go into real specifics because it can vary depending on what you have in your soil. But you're going to definitely feed those plants several times up to the time where you're harvesting. Another whole program right here, disease orchard insect management. Just keep a close eye. If I had to look at which is the easiest to grow, certainly in my opinion, blueberries, blackberries, some of the bush type fruits seem to be much less prone to insect problems. Doesn't mean they don't get them, but there's not a big a problem. I mentioned from the start of the program, peaches are going to almost need constant attention. In fact, you might want to take your cot and set it out there and camp out with your peaches because they're always going to have an issue to watch out for. So they might need a combination of some type of fungicide and insecticide. Oftentimes what I'll say to a homeowner, it can be very complicated if you followed the commercial spray guide for the fruit. I said, well, at the least, go to the store and see if you can find a home orchard spray. And there's a couple of companies that make them, but the home orchard spray will have a combination of a fungicide as well as an insecticide that would be very useful in a kind of an overall program to bring, control and protection for that tree. And how often would you spray? It just depends on the tree, but I would say probably every 3 weeks or so, maybe 4 weeks on some would probably be about right. All right, let's get into the heart of the program, which is the fruit tree pruning. And really, fruit pruning starts the minute you buy your tree and get it home. Make sure you got good tools. The pole pruner up to the top left with the gas-powered thing, maybe for a very overgrown tree, you would use that, but normally you're going to shy away from that. If your trees are getting pretty tall, which, some of them do, between everything from the fig trees to the pears and the apple, a pole pruner, maybe the hand-operated one, like in the bottom left, would be something, pole saw and a little lever would be something you would use. Definitely want to have a pair of good, what I call scissor-cut pruners and loppers, okay? And keep them really sharp. I think that's the key. The sharper you keep them, the cleaner the cut, and it just heals better, okay? And some people, have mentioned, hey, what about, disease control or spreading viruses? It's not a bad idea to protect them from that. I think the best thing to carry with you is a can of Lysol spray, just like you might have in the bathroom. Spray your clippers on occasion, maybe after you finish pruning one tree or bush going to the next one. Give it a spray of Lysol, and that'll help to kill any disease or viruses that might actually be on that tool and that could be transmitted to the next plant. All right, two general systems we're going to use when we're pruning plants. One is the central leader system and then the open center. Okay, so in terms of central leader, where we're going to have a kind of a conical Christmas tree shape, if you will, we're normally talking about pears and apples. Okay, you want to have one lead guy, one king shoot that goes up, and the rest should slowly taper back. So as you get towards the base of that plant, the limb should be longer. Okay, very much like a Christmas tree. Open center, that's going to normally be done on peaches, nectarines, and most plum trees. And the reason is they're a little bit more problematic. We're going to try to maximize the sunlight and the airflow coming into that plant by opening it up, basically creating horizontal growth more so than vertical, so that we have a lot of air and sunlight penetrating in and just helping us with our management. Okay, so looking at the central leader first, and this is going to be, again, apples and pears. If you look at this example right here, well, if you look at the first one, this is kind of what we're looking for. We want to have a open looking plant with one main leader where this thing can branch out, but there's still some openness. I like to say it should look a little bit like a spiral staircase. Every time you come up to a next level, you should have one branch going out, then hopefully move over 90 degrees, have another branch going out as you go up, and so forth. If you look at the bottom example, we got multiple leaders right there in the incorrect pruning, okay? We're going to get something that's going to look like a very nice ornamental crepe myrtle, or maybe something like a Japanese maple, but that's not what we want in a fruit tree. In a fruit tree, we actually want to limit the amount of branches we have so that the energy goes into that fruit, and also we have it open to where we can allow air and sunlight to penetrate, even on apples and pears. All right, so if I get a young plant, oftentimes it'll have a few stems and leaders and this and that. Many times what I'll do is I'll just cut off about 1/3 of it, and I'll prune off every little tiny limb on it. So I'm starting out with something that looks basically like a stick, a pool cue, if you will. Okay, that way I can control the growth as we go. Okay, second year, I'm starting to put out lots of little shoots, advantageous growth. This is where the spiral staircase comes in. I come up the plant maybe a couple of feet, and I allow one limb to start. That bottom limb is going to be the longest limb. Then I move up one scaffold or one level up, hopefully maybe 90 degrees or so over, and I choose another branch, and that goes up, and so forth and so forth. You don't always get the perfect configuration of a spiral staircase, but that's kind of what you're shooting for, to get it as close as possible, okay? So what I'm doing is I'm really opening this thing up. At every level of branches, I don't have more than one branch, you'll notice, okay? Now, if you had two, the world would not end, but the key is not to get it overcrowded on every level, so that we have a very open staircase type. And then, of course, at the very top, I'm going to have one central leader, one main guy going up. That's what we're looking for on the beginning pruning for apples and pears. And oftentimes, you come onto a site where it's a real old pear, real old apple, and people, well, how do I get it back? It takes some radical pruning to open it up, and you can't always get it perfect, but sometimes you really have to eliminate a lot of stuff to get it in its proper form. When it comes to pears and apples, they tend to be very tightly notched. In other words, where the branches are coming out of the trunk, there's not a lot of angle there, very, very tight. It's good to space them, particularly at a young age, using clothespins. As it gets older, you can use pieces of wood with tiny little pins or needles in them, and just to push those branches out a little bit. What you're trying to do is create some 45-degree angles, and this will pay big dividends later. It's going to make that wood where it attaches to the trunk much stronger. If you don't do this, you're going to get a lot of tightly notched branches are going to be very upright. That is one of the biggest problems with the ornamental Bradford pear trees that you see, and we talked about those earlier, but they're very tightly notched. No one's going to take the time to space the branches, and the tree usually does pretty well till it hits about anywhere from about 10 to 15 years, and then what happens is it gets fully flushed out with leaves. We have a wet day and it's windy, and all of a sudden those limbs start to explode off because it has such weak wood. So we're going to try to prevent that by spacing these branches out. if everything works out, you should have something that, and this is a dwarf apple tree right here, so you can see how manageable it would be to work on. Using your imagination, we have somewhat of a Christmas tree shape where we've got a central leader. The branches start out kind of short, and as we get to the base, they're longer. And in this picture, I certainly would want to try to get those apple limbs off of the ground. I probably would have pruned it up a little bit more. So that is apple and pear pruning, where we're doing the central leader. Let's shift gears now. Now we're going to go to the stone fruits. This is the peaches and the plums and the nectarines. If you look at this picture right here, that looks to me like the perfect apple tree or the perfect pear tree. It's just exactly the way I'd want to see it, where you've got one branch, at every level kind of coming out like a spiral staircase. The only problem is it's not a pear or an apple, it's a peach tree. Okay, so what we're going to go here, we're going to go for a open center. It looks almost like a spaceship landed in it when we get done. And those little yellow marks, that's where we're going to make the cuts. So it's not as it's not as alarming when you do this on a young tree, but boy, sometimes when you go to a tree that's about 3 or 4 years old, that people have missed doing it proper, and I go in there and start whacking off major branches, they about have a stroke. But that's what you got to do, okay? And so this is what it should look like when you're done. You've headed back all the branches a little bit. You've left 4 scaffold branches, and you're going to notice they're at a different, each one's a slightly different level. And now you're going to encourage all the growth to go outward horizontally, okay? A good way to look at this as it continues to grow is anything that's growing down from those branches from here on in, you're going to always remove that, okay? You're going to encourage outward growth, and any growth that's growing straight up from those main branches that you see right here, you're going to eliminate them. You're going to maintain a few of the side branches that are coming off left and right of those branches. All right, so you got a mature tree. We've got a lot of thickness going on. This is after the season. We need to prune it. Got to get in here and eliminate some of this. So you're going to start making cuts here, eliminating some of the advantageous growth, some of the very upright shoots or any shoots that are crossing into the center, so that we kind of get, again, that vase shape, open shape that we're looking for. And then we get a completed tree that looks something like this. And I know it looks a little bit radical, a little bit harsh. If you go down to, towards South Georgia, Perry, or anywhere where they grow a lot of peaches, you'll see this. I mean, they're going to look like this, and then in springtime, boom, we get the blooms coming out. Okay. The other thing this does is it makes it manageable to where you don't have to have super tall ladders to harvest it. So you're getting the you're getting the air and the light in there, but you're also able to manage it and actually pick them by hand. Now, remember we talked about the rootstock, and then this is called rootstock dominance. A lot of times I'll come to a place where I'm looking at troubleshooting a tree for someone, and they'll say, hey, I had a bunch of pears at one time. They were really good, but now they all seem to get really small and hard, and they never develop size. And my first question is, well, you sure it's not the rootstock coming out? And the rootstock can sneak up on you. It can grow out of a root, particularly if the soil gets over that grafted area. And then all of a sudden, you've got so much advantageous growth coming out from the root right next to the main trunk, you sort of lose track of where the real tree is. And when that occurs, you're going to get the fruit taking over from the rootstock. And that's normally not going to be a very desirable fruit. Normally going to be very hard, maybe even similar to like a Bradford pear fruit. So you got to get in there, do a lot of work, and eliminate all that rootstock out of there with a saw, whatever it takes to get it out of there and get back to the main trunk. All right, something we don't think about, but it's fruit thinning. If you really want to get quality fruit at the largest size and have all the energy go into it, you really need to thin the fruit. When it comes to fruit thinning, there's a couple of different ways to do it. Remember that apples and pears are going to form up on clusters. There's going to be like a little cluster of blooms that potentially can turn into fruit. Peaches and plums are going to grow in little single flowers along the stem. So when we're thinning apples and pears, and you look up here and you can see, hey, there's these little clumps of fruit. I did a great job. I got tons of fruit on here. Yeah, but what you really want to do is go in there and, believe this or not, for every cluster, eliminate all of the fruit except one. So when you're done, it's going to look like this. Now you've got the energy going into all those little individual fruits. They'll have more sunlight, more air, more of the nutrition from that tree to make sizable fruits. If you don't do that, chances are you'll still get a lot of fruit, but they're going to be much smaller, possibly hard, and won't be near as good a quality. So fruits and pears, I'm sorry, apples and pears, we're going to thin those clusters, and you're going to wait till they maybe about the size of a dime, quarter at the most, thin them out down to one fruit. When it comes to peaches and plums, like I said, those fruits are going to grow along the stem. Okay. Looks like a great harvest here, but we really want to thin them out. So I take my hand and sort of space it out, and everything in between my hand, if you look at the hand on the right here, is going to come out of there, so that I'm spacing them out about 6 to 8 inches between fruit. So when we're done, it's going to kind of look like this. Yeah, we took a lot of fruit out, but particularly on these problematic plants like peaches and to some extent plums, we're going to let that energy go back in and really push those fruits that we left. Now, anytime, I don't care what the fruit plant is, you have damaged or diseased fruit, go ahead and remove that. Also, one of the worst things you can do, and I see this a lot in orchards, is leaving old fruit on there that never ripened, or maybe it was diseased. We call it mummified fruit. It usually looks shriveled up, and lethargic. Well, that is just a haven to overwinter disease. So make sure any old fruit you have on that tree at the end of the season, you remove it and discard it. Now, figs are a little bit different. They kind of grow from large canes or stems, and you can actually use it as an ornamental tree. It's actually very ornate. It's got some pretty leaves on it, okay? The biggest thing with this is really on a fig, if you plant a young one, I really like to protect it the first year. I put a large tomato cage or anything you've got, a wire hoop around it, and I pile in leaves. You can use wheat straw, pine straw leaves, but I give it a winter protection, okay, until it begins to flush out in the spring. Then I remove that. By not doing that, sometimes you're going to lose them to the cold, or they're at least going to die back and slow you up a little bit, okay? So when you plant your fig, I would normally head back or cut back every stem on there about 1/3 of the way. Each additional year, as you start to get growth, you can take back about 1/3 of the growth, and I normally will go inside the plant itself and eliminate some of the canes, because a fig tree can get very thick real quickly. There's going to be all kinds of inner branches, crisscrossing. Try to eliminate a good bit of those. So maybe take out about 1/3 of the inner growth that's crossing and going through the centers, along with about 1/3 of the entire length of the plant. And that fig tree should last for many years. Now remember, it's a self-fruitful plant, so you don't necessarily have to have more than one. Okay, pomegranates we talked about a little bit. A couple of the varieties, Granada and Wonderful, are ones that are often at least tried to grow in our state. They are very, very susceptible to late cold damage, and that you really want to protect them when you can. They look a little bit like a crepe myrtle in all honesty when they're growing. And the way I would cut these back is they're very advantageous. They get thick. I would take back about 1/3 of all the growth each season, and now would be time to do it. And everything we talked about right now, the pruning should be done right now, okay? We will have an exception coming up, but fruit tree pruning should be done right now before things start to flush out. Also on the pomegranates, just like we did on the figs, go inside the plant and eliminate some of the thick branching. It's going to be all kinds of a mess in there, crisscrossing. So you want to get some airflow in there. So take out some of those central shoots and branches, eliminating 1/3 of the overall growth, almost in a bowl-shaped configuration. When you make your cuts, try to cut near a bud so you get a good, clean healing. Muscadines. Well, I've got plenty of these at my house, and to be honest, I got to get out there and prune them. I haven't done it yet, and it's quite a chore. Muscadines is probably the plant that you're going to prune the hardest every season. If you've ever been past a commercial grape orchard or anywhere where someone has muscadines and pruned them, they look like they have had a crew cut done to them. But that is the way they grow. It is the kudzu of the fruit world. Okay, it's just going to grow leaps and bounds after being pruned, and it really needs pruning for good fruit production. First of all, let me say you need a strong system to hold them up. Whether you use a single wire or a double is up to you. Also, when I plant my muscadines, unlike the picture here, I put the base plant, the actual plant, when I plant it, very close to my posts. That's where the most weight is going to be. And I want them to be right next to the strongest point, which is near the post. Oftentimes you see people putting them in the middle between two posts. I don't like that way. I like to get it right near the post to have the most strength, and then train a single leader going down either direction, okay, is the way you want to do it. As you're pruning, what you want to do is try to, and this one's really thick right here, so we want to try to get some of those main leaders out of there so we have only one main line going down the way. And there's like 4 or 5 in here, so there's a lot of pruning to be done. Then on the one that you leave, if you see the bottom picture, I'm counting about 3 buds, 3 little bumps out on that stems, on all the little individual stems, and then I will cut right in front of that 3rd bud. So I'm going to have a main stem going on either direction from the plant, and then I'm going to have all these short little stubs that have about 3 buds in them. Now, if you cut one that's 2 buds and one that's 4 buds, life will go on. It's not going to be a problem. But just somewhere in the area of 3 buds, and just outside of that 3rd bud, make the cut. And I'll work my way all the way down until I get it eliminated. It's going to look like you virtually killed it. In fact, you may see it cry, because muscadines are notorious for bleeding, and we call it bleeding, crying. But I mean, they're going to drip a lot of water that they've got stored up, but nothing to worry. It doesn't hurt the plant at all. Those muscadines are going to form up fruit on that new wood that's about to pop out in the springtime. And before long, you're going to see tiny little BB-sized fruit forming up and eventually turned into the muscadines, okay? Muscadines are not usually self-fruitful, so it's good to have more than one variety out there for good pollination. All right, blueberries. You know, probably some of the most low maintenance plants to grow as long as you get the soil right. And this is where we talked about really got to get a low pH. In a lot of cases in Georgia, you have to lower the pH, particularly if you have them anywhere near your garden where you're pumping lime out there, or around your grass, your lawn area. You can go to the store and buy sulfur, usually a powdered sulfur, elemental sulfur. It's easier to mix it up in water and then spread that out around the plants to try to acidify it to get that pH down. Blueberries are in the azalea family, and if you know anything about azaleas, they can be finicky. We do want to put the blueberries in full sun, but they really need good drainage. They don't perform well in heavy clay, wet clay. That's why the majority of blueberries in the state of Georgia, and it's actually a big cash crop, are grown down in the southern, particularly the southern eastern part of Georgia, very sandy soils. But you can still grow them very well here. What I would recommend doing is amending the soil, maybe getting a good 6 inches or so of a good compost or topsoil or whatever you can get your hands on, and till that into the area where you're going to plant the blueberries. You want to have more than one variety for good pollination. And I would plant them no closer probably than about 6 feet apart, because they're going to get big after a while. They're going to spread out and get large. The first year you get your blueberries is the year that you're going to let them grow and get strength. You may get a bloom or two forming up on your early blueberries, but go ahead and pinch that bloom off. We want to put the energy back into the plant. Every year, prune back that blueberry about 1/3 of the way. Here's the exception. We said that everything you can pretty much prune right now. Blueberries will be the exception. As you get going and fruit begins to produce, that fruit is being formed up on last year's wood. That being said, we don't want to prune blueberries right now, because we're going to be pruning actually the fruit off. So the time to prune a blueberry is right after harvest. Depending on the variety, that could be in June or it could be in July, somewhere during that period. After you've harvested it, go in there. I always look to the base. If I see some weak canes or older canes growing out, because you're going to get new canes every year, prune a few of those out to open up the center. Take back all of the growth, maybe about 1/3, eliminate that and kind of get it under control. The only time I would prune a blueberry in the wintertime is if I was putting a new one in the ground, which you could do right now. I'd probably prune back some, kind of get it, sort of invigorated for spring flush. You're not worried about fruit this year anyway, so I'd prune it now. Or if I had a severely overgrown one and it was like, you know what, this thing's crazy, you can literally prune it back to the ground. and it will come back. They're very tough plants. You could take it back to the ground, or you could do what I call a 2-year prune, where you prune half of the big branches out this year and half the next year, knowing that you're sacrificing a lot of the fruit or maybe all of it, but you're going to get that plant back in bounds where, hey, I can keep this thing at chest level from here on in to where I can really harvest it and maintain it. So that's the only times I would prune in the winter. Other than that, maintenance pruning, light pruning is going to be done after harvest on blueberries. All right, that gets us to the brambles. Again, I think one of the more easier crops for folks to start out with to grow. There's a lot of different ones out there, particularly on the blackberries. You'll see a lot of Indian type names like Navajo, Apache, and some others. They're all really good blackberries. There are hybrid varieties basically from what you see growing in the woods. We know blackberries do well here because you don't have to go very far to see them out in the woods. In fact, oddly enough, my wife prefers the wild blackberries. She makes lots of jelly and so forth. That's what she likes to use in her jelly. She says they've got higher, I think it's pectin or something like that, and it makes a better jelly. But the thornless type blackberries that they have are really nice, where you don't get, full of holes as you're picking them. They make some really large fruit, and for fresh eating, they're fantastic. When it comes to brambles, we're normally talking blackberries and raspberries. And I can tell you up front, I've grown them both. The raspberries are not going to do quite as well. They will not produce near as much. That being said, I absolutely love raspberries. They're one of my favorite flavored fruits, and having a few vines of those is something I just have to have. The also key is in the way you prune blackberries and raspberries. It's 2 different systems. Blackberries in general form fruit on last year's wood, okay? Raspberries can form their fruit up on this year's wood and last year's wood. With that being said, a raspberry bush can be pruned pretty aggressively. You could literally take a weed eater and mow your raspberry. I wouldn't recommend that, but you could mow it back to the ground. And when it puts out new stems this year, those will be fruitful. They will produce fruit. Okay, that's on raspberries. A blackberry won't do that. A blackberry has to have 2nd-year wood. Okay, it's called floricanes to produce fruit. Some of the varieties out there are trailing type or erect. Okay, the trailing type are going to need some type of a cage to grow against, a fence, a trellis. The erect type are almost bush formed. They don't really need any type of support. So keep that in mind. Blackberries, let's just talk about their pruning again. The initial growth that comes out, whether it be a wild blackberry or blackberries, you just planted, the initial growth that comes out in the springtime is called a primocane. It's a green, fleshy type growth. It is what's going to basically build that plant and feed that plant. It will not fruit that year on the primocanes. The following year, okay, that same green, fleshy primocane turns into a floricane. That floricane is the one that's going to put the fruit out in a blackberry. So each year after that, basically what you're doing is you keep pruning out the old floricane. So whatever cane or stem produced fruit this year, that's the one you're going to prune out, if that makes sense. Some people will prune them right after they fruit. That way they can tell the difference. I think if you start growing them and look at them, it's not that hard to tell. The old floricane, the old stem that produced fruit, it's normally going to be kind of brown, brittle. It's not going to look so good. That's the one you want to take out and let last year's wood now be the producer. I think the biggest thing with blackberries again is, and also the raspberries is just making sure you've got enough room. They tend to get very thick. They can. Even the ones that are considered erect might need a little bit of support. Otherwise, they start to kind of grow in all different directions. But they're certainly fairly problem-free. I don't know that you actually even have to spray a fungicide. It might be that you do, but most cases I don't. I've seen Japanese beetles come in and eat on them, as do birds. And that might be another thing, we hadn't talked about. Birds and deer and other animals might get after them. But as far as some of the common things you would see on apples, pears, and peaches, you're not going to get all those issues when it comes to blackberries. So that is what I call a super fast 101 of fruit pruning. Let's just real quickly recap, and then we'll see if we've got time for some questions. The first thing is, when you're selecting your varieties, make sure whether or not you need a pollinator or not. That'll make all the difference in the world, whether you get good fruit production. In general, the stone fruit, which is the peaches and the plums and the nectarines, you only need one of those, including figs as well, one plant, and you can get fruit. On the other varieties, which are going to be the pears and the apples, the blackberries, the blueberries, it's best to plant more than one variety so that you have good pollination and success. When it comes to pruning, to recap, apples and pears are going to get that Christmas tree shape, one central leader, shorter branches towards the top, longer branches towards the bottom. We would like to see only one branch per tier, per scaffold. One or two is okay, but keep it open to where it's kind of spiraling around to give good airflow and circulation. Our stone fruits, the peaches, and we talked about the plums, nectarines, we're going to prune those with a open center. We're going to eliminate that main shoot and allow our growth to kind of go out horizontally. We're taking out growth that's growing down or straight up, and we're kind of keeping some of the growth that's growing out horizontal from our main branches. When it comes to pruning time, almost everything can be pruned right now during the dormant season. The exception are the blueberries that once they get going, any pruning we're going to do on those is going to be, after harvest, which could be June or July. We mentioned pomegranates and figs are very susceptible to cold damage. You kind of want to give them some protection, at least to get them through the first couple of years. Fig trees are not grafted. They're grown from cuttings right off a main shoot. In fact, it's very easy to propagate your own figs doing that. We have a lot of publications online. I think if it's a fairly common fruit, we have a publication that gives you how to grow it, what varieties to look for, how to prune them, and so forth. So if you just go to UGA Extension Publications, there's a search engine in there, and just usually it's under the word like home peaches, home pears. We also have a very good, I don't know if James has given you this information, but we've got a very good fruit tree pruning publication. So if you just put fruit tree pruning in the search engine, under UGA Extension, it kind of covers the A to Z of all the different fruits that are out there. I think that would be very helpful to you. With that, James, I think I got done probably in time. I'm going to get you to help me kind of monitor questions, and we'll see what we got out there and what we missed.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Bob. I really appreciate it. We certainly have had quite a few questions pop up in the chat, and so we'll try and address them. And, if you can't stick around, if you have to leave, you can certainly either email me or email Bob directly, and we'll try and get that worked out for you. But for starters, June asks, what is cherry type?
Cherry type, like cherry type what?
I guess variety, perhaps. I could see if June might clarify, but that's the question as it was asked in the chat.
Maybe she thought maybe I said cherry, didn't mean to, but cherry type. I mean, let me say this. I don't know if we're talking about
Christmas tree shape or peach open type. So yeah, they were talking like the pruning structure, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. We mentioned cherry type. Well, why we say cherries? Let me just throw this out there. You will see cherries available, at the big box stores, and sometimes even in the fruit orchard places where you can buy fruit trees. You can grow cherries. Sweet and tart cherries in Georgia, it's not going to last very long. They're very problematic. They do much better in the cooler temperatures. So let me just throw that one out. What I was talking about is, I guess on the pruning is the peaches and the plums. We're pruning those in a very open shape. We want to try to get those most air, sunlight maximized, whereas the apples and the pears are going to be more of a taller, conical Christmas tree shape. I'm not sure I'm answering the question. I'm not 100% sure what the cherry part was, but
yeah, I think it was more looking at like pruning recommendations. So I imagine since it is a stone fruit, it would be maybe a little bit more of an open center recommended, correct, even if they don't do super great in our climate, I imagine.
Oh, okay. So she was asking, I got you. I misunderstood. She was asking, how would you prune a cherry tree, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Typically they're actually grown a little bit more upright, at least the ones I know from up north. That's where I'm most familiar with them. because they're growing so little in the state of Georgia. I think the more you could open them up, like you just mentioned, probably the better it would be. It's not that they would not normally be pruned that way, say up in the northern climates where they grow best. But if I was going to grow one, I try to get a lot of air and sunlight in the center of it.
Okay, thank you. The next question we had is, what's the white paint on the peach tree trunk?
Ha! I should have mentioned that. I figured that question would come up.
Yeah.
So that is actually it's a white lime paint that they use. Oftentimes it's used on you'll see it on pecan trees, sometimes fruit trees, and basically what it is, it's kind of like when you're going out in the beach in the summertime. You're going to want some kind of sunscreen on, otherwise you're going to fry. Having that white on that trunk helps to protect a little bit of the fruit, what we call the frost cracks, also the sunburn that can happen on the base of that trunk. So it's a little bit of a protector from the sun and frost, and that's what that's on there for. Does it do a substantial job of doing that? I think the school's out on that, but makes people feel better anyway.
Sure. Thanks. So yeah, this next one obviously will be a bit more niche case depending on where you're living, or maybe if you've got a greenhouse or maybe something in that realm, maybe you've got a sunroom. But what type of system, I imagine pruning system, would be used for a lemon tree?
Well, I figured a citrus question was coming after you started off with the greenhouse thing. Yeah, so we've got them growing here at Griffin, and primarily what they do is they try to keep it obviously down to size. So they cut out the central leader, but they don't open it up tremendously like a peach tree. They also try to eliminate most of the competition branching to where none of the branches are crossing over. A little bit more like the pear apple shape we talked about, where you don't want a tremendous amount of competition in the branching. It is going to be a little bit thicker, and you'll have to deal with that. But obviously, you know, those trees can actually get up to some size, and you want to eliminate that by cutting out what we call the apical meristem, which is the upper growing point. So you're not going to do it as radically in most cases as a peach tree, but you are going to kind of keep it topped out a little bit to where you get a little bit more side growth. Okay. And then those side growth, you want to thin that out to where, you know, you don't have crossing branches, anything that's intersecting, anything that's too tightly notched in, you know, coming up near each other. You want to eliminate one of those. So I hope that makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one is, do you have any recommendations for pruning mulberry trees?
Yeah, so you don't see mulberry very often, and that can actually be a fairly large shrub. I believe it's a native plant. They're normally more of a and James, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this. You might know more about them than I do, but it's more of a mounding shape that I see when I've seen them before. And so again, I think I would probably go to the school of what we mentioned on the figs, where I would probably take back about a third of all the growth to try to keep it within bounds. Always looking for damaged wood, intersecting wood that's rubbing that I can eliminate. Trying to open it up anytime on fruit plants. The key is always to try to open up and eliminate competition branches and trying to get a little bit more sunlight and air in there. But again, trying to manage it by, you know, keeping it a little bit more of an oval, more of a fig shape type, I think might be the way to go on that.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you for clarifying. It's interesting. When Melissa and I were living in Avondale, there were a lot of mulberries planted as just kind of like landscape plants. But then we've seen them, yeah, they can get huge. I mean, they really can get big, you know, maple tree size, but I've seen them cultivated a bit smaller tree form as well. So yeah, I think it kind of runs the gauntlet as far as what they can be trained into.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you don't do any pruning on it, it'll you know, just thrive. But at the end of the day, it's going to get out of bounds real quick if you don't give it a haircut.
Sure. The next question we have is, how should you prune a spur-bearing apple tree, and how should you prune a tip-bearing apple tree? What's the difference between the two types?
Okay, say that again.
Pruning tips for a spur-bearing apple tree versus a tip-bearing apple tree.
Okay, yeah. So basically, that's the way that the fruit is configured when it's coming off the stem. But in all honesty, the pruning on that is going to be virtually the same. We're still going to go with a central leader on both those varieties. Still going to want to have that, to some extent, staircase type spiral. That's basically going to be more of a difference when it comes to actually the way they fruit, and the thinning of that would still be the same, where you want to thin down to one. On the spur type, you're going to probably have maybe a few more blooms on there, a few more apples to prune out. But at the end of the day, it's going to be the same pruning configuration for both of those.
Okay. Wonderful. Let's see. So any recommendations on squirrel control on peaches?
Yeah, on peaches. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good one. You can go to like some of the websites and you can buy netting that's good for, virtually, some people have to use them on, bird netting and stuff like that for fig trees, where you drape it over the plant. It allows maximum sunlight, everything to come through, but it just kind of protects your crop. Squirrels are pesky little things, beyond actually eliminating them by shooting, which I can't necessarily recommend. Possibly trapping them. You certainly can't put a little fence around because they'll climb right over that. So it's either going to have to be exclusion using some of these, they've got this netting material. Sometimes you even see it at the garden centers that you could put over it. You don't have to do it year round, but when it's coming into the point of getting towards the fruiting time, you might do that. And or using live traps. You can go to places like Tractor Supply and other places. Squirrels are fairly easy to trap. I used to trap them when I was a kid all the time, just putting a piece of peanut butter bread in there. You catch the squirrel, and then you can take him to who knows where, some park or somewhere, and release him and let him go. But I know my father-in-law, when I was growing up, my father-in-law always or not when I was growing up, and I was early married, he always had a problem with them on the pecan trees. They would just eat the heck out of the pecan trees. He was always fighting those things. But yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't think any repellents or anything like that's going to work well at all. Right. James, you have any other suggestions?
Yeah, I don't know. I know Josh Footer, he's a big fan of using Milorganite on his apple trees for deer. And so I don't know, since that is kind of a human scent, some people recommend things like hair clippings sometimes, getting, just like you said, some habitat modification to try and disturb them a little bit. But yeah, it's always going to be tricky, and that's why it's a game of numbers when you're talking about a full orchard where, just like you mentioned, all the spray regimen, everything that goes into it, it's a big investment. But 10 squirrels in an orchard of 1,000 trees aren't going to do nearly the damage of 10 squirrels in a yard with one tree.
Exactly.
So it's kind of an unfortunate numbers game. If you're a homeowner and you got one single tree you're trying to nourish, some of it too might just be, making sure that you're good about thinning that fruit and trying to get the best fruit that you can, protect that fruit rather than getting it overloaded and, just having a bunch that can get damaged and then kind of, affect the stuff that might be good, I guess. Couple other questions. Can you grow kiwi in the Atlanta area?
Yes, you can grow kiwi. It's a more of a vining type crop. The pruning on that's a little bit more vigorous, but it certainly can make it. It's a little bit susceptible to the cold, but I believe, I might be wrong on this, but you're closer there than I am. But I think we've got kiwi actually over at the garden, at the botanical garden up in Athens. So kiwi can make it. There's even some grown up in North Georgia. So yes, it will work.
Yeah, I think there's actually quite a big trellis of it at the Atlanta Botanical Garden as well.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember if it was fruiting. I mean, Melissa and I've been there a couple times, and I'm pretty sure it was kiwi. But yeah, I've seen some success with it. So that's one of those definite, like, if you're looking for something interesting that is, off the beaten path a little bit, I think that's one that I would recommend. Any info on thornless raspberries, and also, do figs need a lot of water?
Okay. Yeah. Hey, I'm gonna back up 1 second. You're talking about the kiwis. James, we may still have it online. I don't know, but there was a great publication called Minor Fruits and Nuts of Georgia.
Yeah, that's still up. I can see.
And that one would, I don't sit here and, when I'm doing these programs, I kind of try to cover the obvious and the more common stuff, but stuff like, we had a question a little while ago on mulberries. And if you wanted something, about, kiwi and all these other kind of more out there type fruits and nuts, that's a great publication for, kind of basic information.
Yeah, I'll just toss that in the chat for folks.
Okay, great. So give me the question again. I lost my track.
The other one was any info on thornless raspberries?
Yes.
And do figs need a lot of water?
Okay. On the raspberry one, I don't know of a thornless raspberry. I'm not saying there's not one out there. I've grown a couple of them, Heritage. There's another one, I can't think of the name of it, and they're very thorny. Now, there are thornless blackberries out there. On the thornless raspberries, there could be one. I am not aware of it. I have not grown one. The nice thing is, like I said, on the pruning, you could literally not have to get in there with nothing but a kind of I have used a metal cutting blade on my weed eater and actually just mowed them down and then had them come right back from that. So I didn't actually have to touch them so much.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, on the figs, are they huge water users? Not really. They're actually, they pretty much go on their own. I don't actually ever water my fig tree. I certainly probably could use a little bit if it gets dry, or particularly around fruiting time. If you're able to give it a couple of good drinks, that would be, probably well appreciated by the tree. I will say this on all of our fruiting plants that we talked about. Certainly at planting time, they have been sitting in a nursery getting watered probably every day. You have to wean them off. And I don't care if we're talking about fruit plants, ornamentals, trees, or whatever. You've got to give them some water to start with to get them acclimated, to get them used to rooting out in the native soil. So certainly any of these trees, including fig, for the first few weeks, you want to give them a couple inches of water probably per week, just to allow them to kind of wean off of, being in that little nursery scenario. And then over time, depending on what the plant is, it might be able to survive just on the rainwater.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. So somebody else is looking for some clarification on self-fertility of certain plants. So blue and blackberries need more than one plant variety, yes or no? And do plums need more than one tree?
Okay, yeah. So and it's a Penn's answer. Okay, so there are some of there's actually even a few blueberries notoriously do best when you have 2 or 3 varieties near each other for good pollination. There has been one actually developed here on this campus, I think, called powder blue, and it's touted, and I say touted, it's what's a good word? Rumored that it's somewhat self-fertile. I would still want to kick in a couple other varieties with it to ensure good pollination. If it were me, might as well, if you're going to plant one blueberry, plant a couple of them. So put a few varieties out there. On the plums, it depends on the variety. There's one called Methley plum. It is listed as a self-fertile plum. It never hurts to have another variety with it. There are other plum varieties that definitely want to have, a pollinator with it. So if in doubt, it never hurts to stick more than one variety. If you're confused, here's a good one on apples. If you're confused on whether your apple needs a pollinator or not, most cases it does. And Granny Smith, which we're all familiar with, is a great pollinator for almost all of the apples. In fact, Granny Smith apple was developed as a pollinator apple. Wasn't really intended to be eaten, but I guess lo and behold, turns out to be a pretty good one. In fact, my favorite. But it has a very universal pollination code that can be used on all apples. So if you're confused, you want a Red Delicious or a Wine Sap or whatever, throw in a Granny Smith and you'll probably get good pollination.
Excellent. Yeah, I had one, maybe, I skipped over it, but they were asking a bit about your fig protection cage, that winter protection cage. So would that be like a standard tomato cage, basically?
Whatever you have. Maybe you've got a wire hoop compost cage or a larger tomato cage. It depends, obviously, the size of your fig. Most young figs are only going to be a couple, at most a feet, a couple of feet in diameter when you're planting them. And I'm not saying you have to do this every single year, but the first year or two, you really want to kind of protect them. So if you have you can use dog fence wire, something that's maybe about 3 to 4 feet tall and maybe has about a 3 or 4 foot circumference. And you can certainly make that by buying a piece of that and just kind of tying it together. Just sitting that right over the top of the fig all around kind of evenly, and then pile in some pine straw, wheat straw, or even leaves, that come off your trees, just to give it a little bit of a blanket. But be sure to remove that, as we start to warm up in the spring and you start to see the little tips, beginning to flush out.
Excellent. The next question, somebody was asking it is, do American filberts, or I guess American hazelnuts, grow here? And I didn't know this. I had to look it up. You may have some insight on it, though.
Well, I might let you answer that one. I do know, I do have hazelnuts actually on my property, so I think we do still have some. I think a lot of them kind of have, I don't know if they vanished from the same reason of the chestnut blight or whatever. I don't see many, and you can actually buy cultivated, varieties of that. But I do have a hazelnut or two on my farm. What did you find out from your research?
Well, I was looking specifically at this Corylus americana, which I guess is that species, the American hazelnut, because I've seen other things in the same family, like the Harry Lauder's walking stick as an ornamental. I've seen grown with some success, but I had other folks asking me about hazelnuts, and I got kind of mixed responses. It seemed like a lot of them were really grown kind of out in the Pacific Northwest, if they were grown in the Americas. But it does look like that the American hazelnut, its range does extend down to Georgia, though that is the very southern end of its range. So it may be one of those things where it grows a bit better in the northern part of the state rather than the Piedmont or the southern part. It seems like it's well adapted. American hazelnut, it's adapted to a range of soil and pH types, prefers full sun, can grow and persist in partial shade. This is one of those things that's kind of very niche that we'd probably have to look a little bit more in depth. And it's not one of those ones I think you typically come across too much in nurseries, other than, maybe if this would be in like a native plant nursery. So if you're looking for more information, feel free to email me. Maybe we can have a little bit of a correspondence and see, I know we've got a few native nurseries around here. Maybe they could point you in the right direction if anybody stocks it, if you're looking for them.
Yeah, and I was going to add, I actually had a very similar question the other day. And what I did is, since my specialty is fruits and also vegetables and stuff, I don't do a lot with the nut crops. Lenny Wells, our nut specialist who does pecans, but he also knows the hazelnuts and stuff. I actually directed them towards them the other day. I assume they, got in touch with them or through the agent down there. But but yeah, it's not one I know a tremendous amount about, but I do have one sitting right there in the back part of my farm.
Oh, wow.
Which is pretty cool. Yep.
Very cool. Somebody asked the question, are fruit trees salt tolerant?
How are they salt tolerant? That's a great question. I think it depends. I don't think they could take a tremendous amount of salt. If you were in the coastal area, you'd probably have to grow with, with caution, particularly things like the peaches and some other things. The blueberries, I think, would actually be fairly tolerant of salt. They grow all the way up to the coast, particularly in the southeastern part of Georgia, and seem to do quite well. Some of the citrus plants, I know on Sea Island, which is very close to the coast, is right on the coast. There are citrus plants that actually grow there that we don't grow any other place in the state, and they seem to do well. So I think things like apples, pears will be a little bit less tolerant, but the small fruits, the blackberries, I think would do absolutely fine. Blueberries should have no problem at all. I think the figs could tolerate it.
Excellent. We got a question about persimmons. How would you prune a persimmon?
Okay, so yeah, persimmons, there's two rules of thought. You can do it either way. You can either do the central leader or the open, more peach type pruning on that. It kind of depends on the type of persimmon. We've got some of the Asian varieties. Of course, there's the indigenous native persimmons that we have. We've got both male and female trees. But at the end of the day, I kind of like growing it more like a pear and apple, sort of in a central leader form, opening it up as much as I can with the staircase type pruning we talked about, having one branch per leader. I just think they look better that way. And I've seen quite a few cultivated persimmons prune like that, and that's the way I like them. You can certainly top them, open them up, and get away pruning one like a peach tree, and it will do fine as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much for clarifying that.
Yep.
Let me see if we got anything else, because I know we're a little bit past noon now.
There have been some good questions, I'll tell you what.
Yeah, absolutely. And I definitely appreciate all your answers. It looks like we've hit it for the most part.
Okay.
And so I guess before we let everybody go, I did want to say, just once again, thank y'all so much for coming out today. It's really great to see such good participation, and as Bob just said, to get such great questions. I definitely wanted to thank you too, Bob. I really appreciate you adapting to technology. I know it's not an orchard, I know it's not a garden, but you did a great job, and we deeply appreciate all your knowledge you can share with us. And the last thing I wanted to say is, one more time, I put a link to our evaluation survey here in the chat. So if you could, please click that, open that up. It takes 2 minutes to fill out. And that information is critical in terms of informing how we run these programs, what you'd like to see in the future, and making sure that we're serving all the people that we need to serve as part of our mission here at Cooperative Extension. So you have anything else to add, Bob, before we close?
No, I think, again, we still got a few weeks to get out there, maybe buy some fruit plants and get them in the ground. I planted some new ones myself, actually, a couple of days ago. Finally dried out enough to get in the ground to do that, but that's been the challenge. So, but wish everyone luck and success.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank y'all so much. And if you need this recording, either email me or look for it on our website sometime in the near future. And otherwise, y'all all have a great day.